Hello, dear professors, dear colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to present the results of my research, in which I explored the impact of the newest EU circular economy initiatives on the national sovereignty of EU member states and examined whether new measures encouraging a circular economy limit the domain of member states' sovereignty. So, national sovereignty in the EU and the circular economy are two very important concepts. National sovereignty often becomes a hot topic during times of crisis, such as economic downturns, financial instability, or other significant challenges. These crises can sometimes threaten the process of European integration. We've seen that sovereignty conflicts arise during the economic crisis, the migrant and asylum seeker crisis, Brexit, and issues related to the rule of law. These conflicts highlight the delicate balance between national interests and collective European goals. On the other hand, there is a concept of circular economy, which offers a suitable solution to many of our current environmental challenges. Circular economy addresses critical issues such as climate change, biodiversity loss, waste, and pollution. Importantly, it allows to separate economic growth from the use of limited resources. The EU has been proactive in promoting circular economy since 2014. Various measures have been implemented, with the first action plan adopted in 2015. However, certain aspects appeared in EU legislation already in the 70s. In March 2020, the European Commission introduced the new Circular Economy Action Plan, aiming for a cleaner and more competitive Europe. So my presentation is divided into several parts. First, we will assess the measures laid out in the second EU Action Plan. We'll look at how effective these measures have been in promoting a circular economy within the EU. Next, we'll review the progress made in implementing these actions, focusing on important legislative proposals. Then we will explore how different EU countries are developing their own strategies to promote a circular economy. Following that, we'll examine the concept of sovereignty within the EU, how member states balance their national sovereignty in relation to the EU, and the types of instruments and legal bases used for regulating a circular economy. And finally, I'll conclude by noting the current minor impact of EU's regulation for a circular economy on national sovereignty. So the new action plan faced some criticism in the literature. If we compare it to the 2015 action plan, the new plan includes more legislative measures, which is a step forward. However, there's no comprehensive framework directive to align all these measures, and importantly, the action plan itself is not legally binding. While there are more legislative measures now, most of them are softer voluntary actions like indicators, information platforms, and guidelines, rather than strict public law interventions. This raises questions about whether these tools are enough to truly transform our economy from a linear one to a circular one. One major criticism is that the EU strategy doesn't focus enough on reducing the use of material resources. Then a report from the European Court of Auditors in 2023 highlighted that the transition to a circular economy is moving slowly, and achieving the goal of doubling the circularity rate by 2030 seems very challenging. Another issue is the lack of enforceable regulations and specific goals to minimize resource consumption. The current frameworks mainly address what happens at the end of a product's life, rather than actively reducing the resources we use from the start. In summary, while the second action plan has made some progress, there are significant gaps that need to be addressed to make the EU transition to a circular economy more faster and more effective. So, however, if we look at the legislative measures, There has been a significant progress here. Recently, we've seen the adoption of several important new laws at the EU level. These include the new batteries regulation, updated rules on persistent organic pollutants, new waste shipment rules, and the eco-design for sustainable products regulation. Additionally, there's the directive empowering consumers for the green transition, a revision of the industrial emissions directive, and the new industrial emissions portal regulation. There are also ongoing proposals, such as the revision of the construction products regulation, the packaging and packing waste directive, the green claims directive, and the regulation to prevent plastic pellet losses and reduce microplastic pollution. While these new legislative measures and proposals are promising, their true effectiveness will only be seen in the future once they are fully implemented and their impact is assessed. Now it's interesting to see the progress. Okay, pardon. And now it's interesting to see the progress of circular economy policies in EU member states. Even though EU's action plan does not require countries to create their own circular economy action plans, 23 countries have done so. However, only 4 countries, Austria, Belgium, Finland, and the Netherlands, have set specific targets to reduce resource consumption. These targets are a great step forward, but they aren't legally binding, which is a major drawback. Without legal enforcement, it's harder to ensure that these goals are met. In the report, the missing piece of the EU Green Deal, Watkins, van der Ven, and Bondi state that there are several reasons why countries haven't adopted legally binding targets. First, it's challenging to get all parts of the government to work together on these issues. Different ministries might have conflicting goals, making it harder to create a unified approach, as we've seen from the previous presentation. Additionally, there's often a lack of technical knowledge about how materials flow through the economy and how to measure this accurately. And developing the right indicators to track progress can also be complicated. Moreover, countries with strict resource consumption targets might feel they are at a competitive disadvantage compared to those without such requirements, and this can make it harder to push for the ambitious targets. In summary, while many EU countries are making progress with circular economy policies, there are still significant challenges to overcome, especially in setting and enforcing legally binding targets. So now let's examine the relationship between the EU and its member state, with a particular focus on the concept of sovereignty. Although the EU treaties don't explicitly mention sovereignty, the Treaty on the EU has important rules that address this relationship. Article 1, paragraph 1 states that by this treaty, member states establish the EU and confer certain powers to it to achieve their common goals. So this transfer of powers is not a limitation on their sovereignty, but rather an exercise of their sovereign rights. In German literature, sovereignty is linked to a concept called Kompetenz. This means that the entity holding sovereign power has the authority to decide how powers are distributed between central and local units. The German Federal Constitutional Court has addressed this concept in its case law. In the landmark Lisbon case, the court stated that EU law cannot override the constitutional identity of member states. It also emphasized that member states remain the masters of the treaties. And similarly, constitutional courts in other member states like Italy, France, Poland, and Czechia have asserted their authority to review EU measures to ensure that they will not violate the national constitutional identity. The identity clause first appeared in the Treaty of Maastricht. This clause was included because the treaty introduced and expanded policies that could significantly impact national sovereignty. For example, the European Monetary Union influenced monetary sovereignty. Granting European citizenship allowed non-national EU citizens to vote in local elections, and this changed the traditional understanding of citizenship. Additionally, the treaty created new forms of cooperation in foreign policy and justice and home affairs. So the framework governing the relationship between EU and member states is outlined in Article 4 of the treaty. Article 4, paragraph 2 specifically protects the national identity inherent in the fundamental structures of member states. This inclusion shows a widely agreed understanding that despite the progress in European integration, the Union must respect distinct national identities of its member state, which promote values on which the Union is founded. So we now reached the final part of my presentation, where we will examine the form of instruments and the legal basis for circular economy regulation. Historically, adopting legislation in the form of regulations has been more challenging than adopting directives. This is partly because member states often resist regulations that limit their flexibility in implementing legislation. However, recent legislative proposals in the circular economy field show that there's now less reluctance towards using regulations. This shift might need more attention in the future, especially when considering national sovereignty issues. New legislative measures for the circular economy are based on two main articles of the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU. The first is Article 114, which focuses on market harmonization. When this article is used as the legal foundation, member states cannot add extra regulatory requirements, so this makes it harder for them to deviate from the harmonized rules. The second is Article 192, which deals with environmental protection, and this article supports minimum harmonization, allowing member states to implement stricter national standards if needed. This flexibility can be crucial for addressing issues related to national sovereignty. So these choices may have a significant role in how flexible member states can be and how the balance between EU-wide rules and national sovereignty is struck. So in my conclusion, I'd like to revisit the key points about national sovereignty and circular economy. Firstly, debates about protecting national sovereignty often revolve around welfare state policies and the protection of fundamental constitutional rights, especially social and economic rights. Member states also assert their sovereignty in areas like freedom, justice, and security, particularly in response to issues like terrorism, migration, and asylum seekers. When it comes to environmental protection and the circular economy, EU member states have not significantly claimed that their sovereignty is being undermined by EU actions. In fact, environmental protection is often seen as a global issue that requires international cooperation and coordination, which individual states cannot effectively address alone. However, there are challenges ahead. The suitability of EU instruments for transitioning from a linear to a circular economy is still uncertain. Achieving the ambitious target of doubling the circularity rate by 2030 is likely to be very difficult. In summary, while there are ongoing debates about national sovereignty in various areas, environmental protection and circular economy have not triggered major sovereignty concerns, yet the path to a fully circular economy remains challenging and will require continued efforts. Thank you for your attention.